Bahrain is battling a sharp surge in COVID cases despite a high rate of inoculation using the Chinese vaccine. Now, because of limited efficacy of the Chinese jabs, not just Bahrain, but UAE is administering Pfizer BioNTech jabs to those especially with comorbidities and those above the age of 50. The Middle East had invested heavily in the Chinese vaccine. There is alarm over antibodies not being formed despite 2 Chinese jabs being taken. And it's not just the Middle East. Serbia is facing a similar problem. Our Health Bureau brings you our top story.
Are Chinese vaccines Sinovac and Sinopharm ineffective? No antibodies developed despite the jabs? Bahrain and UAE quietly have started revaccinating their populations with the Pfizer BioNTech vaccines.
This does cast a shadow on the efficacy of the Chinese Sinopharm vaccine. However, we cannot still write it down. Only time would tell as to what has exactly happened, why a lot of vaccinated patients are coming up with repeat infections.
The efficacy of the Chinese vaccines, which were earlier administered, was always in doubt, with China's claims not backed by either any study or data. But a report in the Wall Street Journal has exposed the inefficiency of the Chinese jabs.
The glaring example of its efficacy came from Seychelles, where maximum number of people, percentage of population has been vaccinated with this vaccine. Even then, there was a flare-up of cases.
According to the Wall Street Journal, in Serbia, 29% of 150 participants who took the Chinese vaccine were found to have 0 antibodies against the virus 3 months after they received the first 2 shots of the vaccine. The average age of people who participated in the Serbian study was higher than 65. 10 people out of 150 who received Sinopharm and participated in the study contracted COVID-19, the report said.
Variants of concern sometimes can have immune escape. It also goes to show that we need robust vaccines which are immunogenic. And I'm very happy to say that both the current Indian vaccines, which are available with us, are immunogenic and have some data against variants of concern. And even the third vaccine, which is Sputnik, which is now available for Indians, also will have robust data both from Russia as well as it is available in 40 countries, and also a bridging trial in India has been done.
India, incidentally, had politely yet firmly turned down the offer of the Chinese vaccine, relying more on the Made in India Covaxin and Covishield. Bureau Report, India Today.
From the virus to the cure, China remains in the line of fire. Joining me on India First is Professor Brahma Chilani, one of India's foremost voices on China, and Dr. Harsh Mahajan. He heads Mahajan Imaging. Professor Chilani, India perhaps proven right, taken the right step, saying no to the Chinese vaccine. Its efficacy is in question, and the country refuses to share information, not just about trials, but also side effects of the Chinese vaccine, sir.
You're absolutely right, Gaurav. Even the head of China's CDC publicly admitted that efficacy of Chinese vaccines is low. He called for improved vaccines to be developed. So when the head of China's CDC says that openly, it's such an admission that the Chinese vaccines are not effective. But China is using vaccine diplomacy in a major way to help repair the damage to its image and reputation. The pandemic has driven negative views of China to a record high internationally, according to a survey done by the Pew Research Center. So China, just the way it tried to repair the damage to its reputation in the early stages of the pandemic by pushing mask diplomacy, in a similar way, it's pursuing vaccine diplomacy today. But we know how their mask diplomacy went.
Oh, absolutely. Fake PPE kits, bad masks. I'll come to you in just a moment. You're absolutely right. And bad vaccines here. Dr. Mahajan, the fact that Pfizer BioNTech vaccines are being recommended for those with comorbidities and those above the age of 50 in Bahrain. Isn't it clear that the Chinese vaccine is not working and it's ineffective, sir?
I think that may be a bit premature, Gaurav, to conclude that based on some of the reports that have come. It is well known, of course, that the Pfizer vaccine has much higher effectiveness as well as efficacy as compared to the Chinese vaccine. Chinese vaccines, as we know, there's been a wide range of claims bordering starting from 50.3% and going up to nearly 90% in different small trials that were done in Indonesia, done in Brazil, and elsewhere. And a recent, paper in the JAMA, which is the first time that actually we got some peer-reviewed data, it says it varies between 72 to 78.
Okay.
How true that is, time will tell. But the fact is that the Pfizer vaccine is definitely better with an efficacy of 95%. And so it's not surprising that if a country feels that a vaccine they've had in the past is not working, or if it was working, its efficacy is gone down because it's 3 to 6 months later that these testing has been done,
okay,
then they are going for a better vaccine.
Okay, but no, let's the devil, sir, lies in the detail, and I'll come to that in just a moment, because Professor Chilani, in your view, is this a setback to the Chinese vaccine and Chinese vaccine diplomacy, considering countries like Serbia or Brazil? They've raised questions. Brazil has said about 50% efficacy. Serbia said even after 2 jabs, no antibodies.
Well, if you look at the cases of Seychelles and Bahrain, these 2 countries have among the world's highest rates of vaccination.
Yes.
And both these countries have relied on Chinese vaccines. Now, the fact that these 2 countries, Bahrain and Seychelles, are now battling major COVID surges despite high rates of vaccination is a telling commentary on the efficacy of Chinese vaccines. The fact is that, of course, that new variants are in play, that that these Chinese vaccines, both by Sinopharm and by Sinovac, are inactivated vaccines. They use the whole virus, which has been inactivated for their vaccine. And this type of vaccine traditionally requires boosters. So that could be one factor, but
okay,
it certainly is a blow to China's vaccine diplomacy efforts, because if the efficacy is not good, if it's leading to vaccinated people picking up infection of COVID, then certainly this is bad advertisement for Chinese vaccines.
Because with this vaccine, Dr. Mahajan, it is presumed that antibodies would be developed, but 0 antibody after the first jab, low efficacy amongst the elderly. In your view, sir, has China been pulling wool over the eyes of the world, not just about the virus, but also the cure?
I think that's something which may have substance to it, because, scientists across the world have been saying that there is a lot of opacity, there's no transparency, and it's only this recent publication, which is the first publication. However, if you look on the other side, the WHO has granted emergency use approval to 2 of the vaccines. And that is when in China itself, they have run the test only till 59 years of age.
Yes.
But the WHO has approved it even above that age, saying that, there's no reason to believe that it would be ineffective above that age. Now, we do know that as you age, and especially above the age of 60 years, the overall efficacy of any vaccine reduces. And if a vaccine is not up to the mark, then above that age, it would be much less effective. Second, as Dr. Chilani has pointed out, that immune escape mechanism and
yes,
these new mutant viruses that are there, maybe this vaccine is not as effective against them. So that's why it's very important in the world of science, in the world of medicine, to be transparent. There's nothing wrong. You can always tweak the vaccine. But if you want to gain brownie points and, show that you are helping the world and in the process actually harm, that would not be right at all.
And which is what appears to be happening. But you raised a fair point about the World Health Organization. And Professor Chelani, this brings into focus the actions or inactions of the World Health Organization once again, not just in perhaps covering up the Wuhan lab or the transmission of the virus or the spread of the virus initially, but also the vaccine.
Well, the WHO was complicit in China's cover-up of the origins of the corona virus pandemic. And the fact that WHO has approved 2 Chinese vaccines, one after another, is also indicative of the clout that China wields over this international organization. But I think you also have to keep in mind one other point, which is that many developing countries have had no choice but to rely on the Chinese vaccines because that is the only source of supply available to them.
Yes.
The rich countries have cornered the better vaccines. And Biden's America First vaccine policy has left the field wide open for China to advance its vaccine diplomacy. It is the US vaccine policy that has helped make China's vaccine diplomacy a success. The result is that the world is fast becoming reliant on Chinese vaccines that are not very effective. India could be the engine to vaccinate the world, but the Biden administration, instead of using the vast Indian vaccine manufacturing infrastructure to supply much needed vaccines to the developing countries, indirectly aided China's interests by leaving developing countries in the lurch through its hoarding of vaccines and their raw materials. Only now, Biden has agreed to export some American vaccines.
In fact, it remains to be seen. Oh, you're absolutely right. And why would Biden do that? Is America shooting itself in the foot, letting China become far more influential and powerful? Is a question that even Joe Biden and the administration need to respond to. But Dr. Mahajan, this limited efficacy, it's not just being reported from the UAE or Bahrain, but Serbia, Brazil concluded that the efficacy of Sinovac was much lesser than what the Chinese were claiming. Chinese were claiming between 70 and 90%, but according to Brazil, it was just about 50%.
That's true, Gaurav. 50.3% is what they found in a large trial that they did. And that's why, it's whether it's the clout that China holds amongst countries where it can actually are the results being tweaked? Because how can a vaccine be 50% efficacious in one trial and the same vaccine be 90% efficacious? Give or take 5 or 10% is understandable, but 40% difference is really extreme. And to the point that has been made about Chinese vaccine diplomacy, see, if this is actually not as good as the Chinese claim, then it can come back to bite them. Because if countries where Chinese vaccine is given, and if it doesn't provide protection, then 3 or 6 months down the line, if they have surges of the pandemic, then, all the brownie points you get from providing the vaccine will just go down the drain.
Well, you're absolutely right. Bahrain sees that surge, but China will find another scapegoat, and its handmaiden, the World Health Organization, will perhaps give it cover fire once again. But Professor Chelani, what next for China? Countries like Pakistan, countries that have no money, countries that, poof off all their money in their nuclear arsenal and don't have money to feed their country, they'll remain reliant on the Chinese jabs, as will some other countries. But the Indian vaccines, in comparison, don't they have a much better track record? And can India then move into this space very quickly in the coming maybe by the end of this year, 216 crore jabs for India and subsequently 2022 for the world? Or will that be too late?
I think by autumn this year, India would have surplus vaccines to export because by August, September, several new vaccine candidates will enter into large-scale production in India, and that will open up space for India to resume its exports, especially to neighboring countries. Now you see what's happening to countries like Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, countries that India supplied vaccines in a major way. These countries are now relying on Chinese vaccines, and China is imposing very unfair terms on them. For example, Nepal has disclosed that China has first demanded that Nepal sign a non-disclosure agreement. That is an agreement to keep everything secret, the terms of supply secret, before China even releases the price of the vaccine. So even the price of the vaccine will be disclosed to Nepal only after Nepal signs a non-disclosure agreement. And we have seen from other examples like Paraguay and Honduras in Latin America, how China is weaponizing the pandemic by demanding that these countries, if they want Chinese vaccines, they should break their diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So these are examples of how China is exporting the hardship caused by the pandemic, which arose within its own borders. It's exploiting the hardship of countries to advance its economic and political interests aggressively.
And it's so sad that not many are willing to expose China. Taiwan very bravely called out China just today. But Dr. Mahajan, if you had a choice as a doctor, Sinovac or Covaxin or Covishield or Sputnik V, what would you advise your patients, sir? What would you administer to your patients? The Chinese or the Indian jabs?
Gaurav, in the field of medicine, we go by evidence. We go by science. And, the evidence is there definitely for the Indian vaccines. It's been accepted globally. And we've given crores of jabs, not only in this country, but the Covishield has been used extensively in the western parts of the world. And we are seeing also from the data that's available to us that it's highly efficacious in the real world. And also the fact that very, very few who have been fully vaccinated, in fact, even those who've had one jab, hardly, a minuscule minority are getting breakthrough infections. So these are vaccines which are actually providing immunity against the new mutant strains that are coming. And this is something which is validated.
I will let that be the last word.
I don't think there's any choice.
Okay, I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. Professor Brahmachalani and Dr. Harsh Mahajan, always such a privilege to have you on the broadcast here with me on India First. Shifting focus to the other big story.